First and foremost, thank you and welcome to our first ever Google Hangout. Congratulations on being selected as finalists for the Google-supported Citizen Media Competition. There were 426 entries submitted to this competition from 75 countries. So we're very excited to have you all on board, and you really are the best and the brightest of this bunch, and we're thrilled to hear more about the great work that you're doing. The work that you all are doing, that the finalists on tomorrow's call are doing, are really, truly changing the way that we create, share, and consume information. And we're excited to hear more from you directly. So just a little bit about what we hope to accomplish here today. We've invited you to really introduce you to each other, and to hear and learn about your experiences. So we don't really plan on talking much. So with that, I'd like to introduce you to the moderator of this conversation, Alex Howard, who I will hand the floor over to in a bit and allow him to introduce himself further. We also are expecting Esther Wojcicki, did I say that right? Who is Vice Chair of the Board of the Creative Commons. And if she sneaks out of a meeting early, Catherine Marr, who is working on innovation at the World Bank. Next to me are my incredible colleagues, Sarah Mintz and Tim Shy, which I just learned today. And I will let them take a second and introduce themselves as well.
Hi everyone, again just to reiterate what Ava just said, congratulations. This is really an exciting competition for all of us. I've been with the Changemakers team for, and here we have Esther. Welcome Esther, we're just kicking off. Can you hear us?
Thank you. I can hear you, but I can't see you. Oh, now I can.
Wonderful.
We were just going through quick introductions, and then we are going to go on mute to spare you all the feedback and echo that happens when we talk.
Okay.
So this is just the Changemakers team here. We have Ava, I'm Sarah, this is Tim. Really excited to see all of you here this evening or early this morning for you, Paul. Thanks so much for joining us all around the world, and hand this over to Tim?
Well, I just wanted to add, it's a real privilege to sort of see the faces associated with these brilliant ideas. I've been really involved in a lot of the evaluation process, both working with great folks like Esther to sort of make some of the final decisions in our judging, but also just reading hundreds of different applicants to this competition, and truly I think all of your innovations really stood out, and so we're really excited to be able to share this with a lot of other folks out there who are following the citizen media space. So thank you.
All right, great. And with that, we'll go ahead and real quick, should we have Esther go ahead and introduce herself?
Yes, please.
Esther, would you mind taking a moment to introduce yourself to some of our finalists?
Sure. So I have a bit of a delay. I hope that's okay for all of you. But so I'm a teacher. That's my main job in life. And I teach journalism. And I have about over 100 journalism students. And at this school that I teach, Palo Alto High School, I founded this journalism program in 1985. And today we have more than 550 kids taking journalism. It's the largest in the country. Well, it might be the largest in the world. I don't know. I haven't checked around the world. But the idea is to empower these kids and give them an opportunity to contribute to what's going on in the world, have their say. And so I'm really involved in citizen media. And so we have a television, website, magazines, newspaper. We have everything. The only thing I'm missing, I don't have radio. And but we do have podcasts. But they don't seem to be as popular anymore as they used to be. But the most popular thing that we have really is the web at the moment. So, and then also I work with several foundations. I'm a consultant for the Hewlett Foundation and for the Carnegie Foundation. And then I'm on a few boards here and there. And I do, I also consult for Google as well. So that's my background. I'm very excited to be here and to be a part of this. So I'm a journalist at heart. Been a journalist. Actually, I started as a journalist. I worked for Time magazine years ago. I'm sure before all of you were born. It was really fun. So that's about it.
Great. Thank you so much. And with that, we'll pass the conversation off to Mr. Alex Howard from O'Reilly Media. He works very closely with Government 2.0 initiatives and knows the space pretty inside and out. So thank you, Alex.
Well, thank you. I know I had to drop off there recently. The joy of this space is that we're still working out the tech as we go, and sometimes it fails us. That's one of the fascinating things about civic media, citizen reporting, citizen journalism, whatever you want to call it. I think we're all stumbling through the same space more or less in real time. And hearing Esther talk about what's happening in podcasting, I think a lot of what it is that we now have the capacity to do some of these things that only news organizations can do before really wherever and whenever we are, and tune into them. And I'm specifically thinking of some of the live streaming that we're seeing from around the world. I think the chuckle line that I'm hearing now is not that the revolution will be televised, it's that it'll be live streamed by thousands of citizens armed with laptops, internet connections, and smartphones. And I'm really honored and a bit humbled to be here talking to everyone on this call, because in looking through the things you're working on, it's quite clear that you're going to be right at the edge of inventing and testing and playing with and exploring what this new media landscape is going to be like, and what the tools are that we're used to navigate it. And you're going to help us see through your eyes and through the eyes of the people around you what you're experiencing, even if I'm in DC and you're in Australia, or vice versa. So it's really a pleasure to be here. And with that, I want to get right to the people on the call. Usually I would look down a panel here at the table and say start from left to right. So maybe this time around we can start from the top of the screen down to the bottom, at least on my side. Let's see, how about James? Would you like to just give us not the Twitter pitch, but maybe the elevator pitch of what it is you're working on, and we'll go from there.
Sure, thank you. I'm working on something called FreedomBox. It's a small, low wattage personal server, mostly for home use, that we're going to fill with software that will protect your privacy, freedom, security, and anonymity while you use the internet. So it's a way to basically take all your communication that you currently channel through very centralized, easy to monitor, easy to censor structures like Google or Facebook, and instead put them on our own infrastructure that we maintain as a community and that we can trust because it's open source software, and then we can talk directly to our friends and our families instead of passing the messages through untrusted middlemen.
And for people who want to learn more, what URL can they visit online?
FreedomBoxFoundation.org.
All right, thank you, sir. Moving on down to Melissa, can you give us the same thumbnail a bit more?
Sure, no problem. Hi, everybody. It's nice to meet you, too. And I just wanted to say likewise, it's an honor to be here amongst you all. So I work for mobileactive.org, and we're a nonprofit that we're a network of people that are using mobile technology for social change. And we launched a project through Mobile Active just this year called the Mobile Media Toolkit. And essentially what the site is it's a free resource that helps anybody try to make sense of this fast, growing, and important field of mobile media and mobile technology in journalism. And so we have the site available in multiple languages, available currently in English, Spanish, Arabic, and we are working on Russian as we speak. And what we try to do is share case studies of innovative ways that people are using mobile phones in media around the world. So radio stations in Africa, radio stations in the United States, newspapers, bloggers, independent journalists, you name it. And we review new mobile tools that are coming out, and as you all are probably aware, there's new mobile tools and new innovations all the time, so we try to stay on top of it and provide how-to guides and and content that helps walk people through how to use mobile technology in your work. And as part of that resource, we thought that it would be important to not only write about some of these tools, but actually test them, get them to journalists who are in the field working, and ask them to use them and ask them to tell us, what works or what doesn't work. And so we are partnering with Al Jazeera, based in Doha, Qatar, and a team of their reporters are actually going to be tasked to try out some of these tools that we suggest. And then we're going to have conversations with them about what they thought of them and if these tools, aided in their work, and what else they sort of want, their wish list as far as mobile tech and media. And then with all those lessons that we learn, we're going to put all this information and the tools themselves on SD cards and deliver them to anybody who's interested in taking that card and literally plugging it into their phone. So hence the name Mobile Journalist on an SD card. That's where the name of our project comes from. So just making it easy to add mobile components to your work as a citizen journalist.
Great. And what URL can people look for?
Well, right now the Mobile Media Toolkit is at mobilemediatoolkit.org.
Great.
And then mobileactive.org.
Okay. Thank you. Unfortunately, since I'm stuck with an iPhone, I will not be able to plug one of your SD cards in, so I'll have to test it out on another device.
I will be to test it.
Excellent. Good to hear. Excellent.
So moving on down the screen, next to Paul Gardner-Stephen. Did I get that right, Paul?
Yep.
Okay. Tell us more.
Sure. So my project is the Serval project at servalproject.org, and what we've really been trying to do is all of the instances where mobile communications is not possible because infrastructure is down, destroyed, too expensive to use, or just doesn't exist if you're in a remote or in many developing areas. We've created software that can run on smartphones so that basically you can form your own mobile phone network out of your phones, keep using the same numbers, multi-hop mesh. So there's a number of synergies actually with what FreedomBox are doing in terms of enabling communication without dependence on infrastructure or big enterprises. And one of the really exciting things, actually, the first real deployment of our technology is actually with a citizen media project for waterfront communities in Nigeria that are looking to self-organise and to actually protect themselves against human rights violations and things. So they're actually using our technology to support citizen media and distribution of the material that they generate. So it's tremendously exciting.
Great. And where can people learn more online?
Servalproject.org.
All right. You all have chosen some fantastically good plain language addresses online, I have to say. And then finally, Ryan Jones, please tell us more.
Hi, I'm Ryan, and I am on the team at Frontline SMS. We've been around for a few years now, which is an eternity in the mobile technology space, especially in the developing world where most of our projects are based. And basically what we do is we have an open source, a free open source SMS aggregation platform that any types of community organizations can use to broadcast messages to subscribers and also initiate two-way dialogues with their communities and stakeholders. And over the past probably year, from the beginning, it's been very popular among community radio stations as a way to transform radio from just a broadcast mechanism into a way of bringing listeners' voices and listeners' concerns into the conversation that they're having on the radio. So over the past probably 6 months, we've been developing in partnership with a few different organizations. It started with a research partnership with Cambridge University to build out specific tools with community radio stations and community journalists in mind, and then so add software tools to the software, but also start to develop a community and a sort of resource kit of how to sort of best practices in using SMS in community engagement. And a few of our pilot projects that are up right now, I was just looking at some stories before we started, and Pamoja FM, which is in Kibera outside of Nairobi in Kenya, they have a project where a fresh water supply inside Kibera is controlled in large part by cartels, price-fixing cartels. And so Pamoja FM is using Frontline SMS to collect reports of what people are paying for water in various places around the community, and then they're telling people where the best prices are right now and basically cutting the legs out from underneath people who are trying to rip them off. So that's a pretty exciting use for us, and just the example of what something like this can do, because in the U.S. texting to a TV station means voting for an American Idol more often than not. But in the communities that we're trying to reach, it's in a lot of places it's their first real opportunity to have their voice heard. So we're really excited about that work.
And that's I think frontlinesms.com, is that right?
Yep, frontlinesms.com, and then our initial work with radio stations is at radio.frontlinesms.com.
So you just gave a great example of how citizens armed with cell phones using SMS can offer a great deal of transparency in an area that just simply didn't exist, both in terms of the industry sector and in terms of the country itself, the geographic region. And I sort of want to delve into this particular issue. There's a lot of parts of the world that have never had this capacity for their citizens to be able to collectively look back at the society and then share what they're seeing with the rest of the world. I'd like to walk back through each of you and learn more about how you see the tools being used and how the world has changed since you built them the first time, or first came up with the idea. And to see how they're being used and the changes that are coming out of there. And I'll go backwards this time, so we'll start with you, Ryan. You gave it a great example there. How else is Frontline SMS contributing to citizens' capacity to report on what's happening in their countries?
Sure, I think for Ken Banks, who initially wrote our software, had a really specific use for it in mind, which was connecting a central conservation organization to a community where they were doing conservation projects so they could keep them up to date, and sort of just put the software out there and was stunned by the amount of ways that it's been used. So in terms of your question about what's changed, I think from what we first expected when the software first hit the open market, it's been incredible how many different ways that people have found to use it. And I mean, for us, that's the most exciting thing, is letting people do whatever they want with it. In terms of how it can contribute to people having their voice heard, especially by the world, this is one of the places where we think that textual tools like just basic text messaging are so exciting, because it allows you, on the one hand, to reach really last mile communities where they don't have smartphones or internet access. I mean, mobile phone penetration in sub-Saharan Africa is almost 80%, and broadband and internet penetration is still somewhere around 30%. And so by using SMS for these things, you're enabling concentrated collection of disparate data from a whole bunch of different places. So if you can ask an SMS a question and have people answer via SMS, you have a really efficient way of collecting the moods and thoughts and opinions of an entire community all at once, or at least the people who are willing to respond to your question. And that's a powerful tool for journalists and advocates to be able to have in their back pocket when they go to make change at a higher level that the individual community members would never be able to reach on their own.
Well, thank you very much for that, Ryan. Paul, how are things changing where you see people using your project? Where are the changes in terms of the communities that you're working in?
So I think, it's early days in terms of deployment for us, and we're hoping quite soon to get the initial feedback from the use in Nigeria. But I guess ultimately what we see is that there are many disasters that can cause deprivation of infrastructure. And one of the ones that we hadn't really thought about initially, but we've had tremendous feedback to, is actually, if you like, a political disaster. So instead of it being a volcano or an earthquake that actually deprives people of communication, that it's actually some political event that actually has the same effect. And just as with a natural disaster, and we saw this very clearly in Haiti, where the loss of coordinated communication capacity meant that what there was left of the government and of local security through police and the like really actually became quite dysfunctional, because they weren't able to actually coordinate their action. And so there were terrible things that actually happened in that community as a result. We're talking with people who are volunteering in the medical field, and they'd be driving from one hospital to another, and there'd be what looked like a government roadblock. And so they'd stop and go, okay, fine. And what actually became clear was actually that these were not government. They were actually basically thugs with guns who would rifle through your car, take what they wanted, and then let you go on if your car wasn't better than their car. Otherwise, you might find yourself without a car as well. So it's trying to stem these, the fallout from these political as well as natural disasters that really has us excited. And Ryan's been talking about the effect of getting SMS to people and what that can do. And getting SMS without infrastructure is something that we've been working very strongly to do, and expect to have a really nice way in the next few months. And we hope that will have an immense impact, because we're structuring it so that you don't even need to be in range of the person you're texting at the time, that it will be a store and forward. So it might be that you almost get through a day or two later when someone walks from one village to another, and then you can actually still get your receipt of reception through. So we're really hoping that getting these things that we take for granted in the developed world and in richer countries available to every last person on the planet, and especially those who need it most.
Thank you, Paul. So, Melissa, I clicked over to mobileactive.org, and the first thing I saw was, I think it's Avaz, if I get that right, .de, and it just was a reminder of that this particular space, mobile civic media, has become internationalized. And you described the different languages it's rolling out and how much that's expanded. Can you talk a bit more about what's changed since you started and how people are adopting and using the platform around the world?
Definitely. And I think one of the biggest and most obvious changes is just, this has been alluded to already, but just the increased penetration of mobile phones and the accessibility with access to a phone where people don't have similar access to the internet, or they have to use internet cafes where security or cost can be an issue. And so part of what we try to do is, I think also it's important to recognize that as mobile phone penetration grows, it's not necessarily smartphone penetration. A lot of people are still using the basic Nokia feature phones. And so being able to speak across that divide of all mobile tech is important. So a lot of what we try to do with Mobile Media Toolkit is say, well, here's a great idea of how to use SMS, here's how you would do it on Nokia, and here's how you could adopt this brand new app for this Android phone. And so speaking across those different levels of technology, I think is pretty key. And that's a lot of what we're trying to do with Mobile Journalists on an SD card, is provide the training and support that I think is integral to successfully adopting mobile tech in some of these citizen media and civic media projects. And so not necessarily holding somebody's hand, but giving them the resources and tools that they can use to then, choose, well, what's going to work for my goals, or what I have available as far as tech and infrastructure goes. So just giving people the extra incentive, I think, to efficiently and successfully add mobile to their work, is it's important.
Definitely. Thank you, Melissa. So, James, I think I actually had a chance to hear you speak in New York at the Contact Conference not so long ago. And one of the things that I was reminded of in that context was that so many of the platforms that we now are using to communicate in real time around the world, including the one we're on right now, are owned by third-party private technology companies. Facebook, Google, Twitter, LinkedIn. These are all, in this case, Western companies, but there's certainly others as well, that are hosting the discussions in the new public square, that being the internet, or public square of the 21st century. Your particular project is creating something which is not corporate owned. Can you talk about what the reaction to that has been, and whether you see there being a real a market or uptake for that? And I say that because I know that projects like Diaspora have been launched to be a different alternative to Facebook, or Identica to be an alternative to Twitter, but they haven't gained traction. What's been the reaction of the broader community to the idea of the FreedomBox, and to people wanting to embrace it and hack it and adopt it into their communications practices?
It's really interesting how widespread this idea gets. And, if I look at the people who love us on Diaspora or are interested in us on Identica, those are the usual suspects, all the people who would expect to be interested in our project, the people who have sort of self-selected to join those services. So they're our natural audience. But everywhere I go, where I speak to people who are not just our natural audience, this really resonates with people who are non-technical and who don't normally think about these sorts of issues, but they want a very simple turnkey solution to getting them out of the current quasi-public, quasi-private, omni-spied-upon square where they currently have their communication. There's a lot of people who are concerned about the privacy implications of their online behavior, but they don't actually have any knowledge or ability to take their communication anywhere else. And if they did, the people they would be talking to wouldn't follow them. So they're looking for a way to protect their privacy, and there's no one really serving their needs. The technology exists to protect everybody's privacy, but no one has put it together in one place, made it easy to use, and made it accessible to people who just want to grab a box off the shelf, plug it in, and have privacy. And that's the gap we're trying to close. I mean, you guys are doing amazing work in your project. You're developing really impressive technology. My goal in life is not to develop technology. My goal in life is to watch the stuff you do. And when you push it out the door as free and open source software, to integrate it into a box and make it accessible to other people so that when people who are not technologists, people who are not motivated enough to reorganize their entire lives around privacy, but still care about privacy, when they can have that, there is a way for that need to be met.
So our good hosts here are telling us that we can talk for a little bit longer than I thought. Is everybody up for continuing on for a bit more?
Yeah.
Okay.
I can talk for a little bit more. I might drop off for a moment to call my wife.
So Esther, I feel like if you're going to be hanging out with us, we really have to pull you into the conversation a little bit more. You're far too much of a resource and a presence there not to ask some questions and pull you into the discussion. As you look at this evolving citizen media space, civic media space, what are the things that excite you and what are the things that concern you? I know that as people look at this very quickly evolving part of the world in terms of the technology and this intersection of citizens using it to more closely track the government, often issues around privacy and security and identity are coming up a lot more because of the uncertainty that governments, including ours here in the United States, have around citizens wielding this kind of power. What are you seeing that excites you or concerns you?
Well, so what excites me about this is giving people, the ordinary citizen, a voice, giving them an opportunity to be heard and empowering them. And your typical citizen, I think, prior to this, when they saw that there was any kind of a problem, whether it was a large or small governmental issue, they would just like, oh, there's nothing I can do about it, let's just, let's go out for coffee kind of thing. But I think now if we can make it clear to lots of people that there is something you can do about it, you can speak up, you can work in groups, there's a lot of support, social media. I think that we can hopefully get rid of some of the corruption that we see. I mean, unfortunately, corruption is not just isolated to one country. As you look around the world, it's like everywhere, including in the United States, where people like to think that we're pure, which is just a joke. I think the biggest drawback or the biggest problem that we face is unfortunately in education, where, I just did a poll just now before I came here to talk to you guys. My class is actually taking place right now while I'm here talking to you. And I asked them what percentage of their classes out of a 7-period day are classes where they actually get to collaborate or interact or use technology or do something besides be lectured at. And it was just, they were lucky if they had one class, which just happens to be my class. All the other classes are lecture-based. So the question is like, how do these kids learn to use, how do they feel confident using social media? And it turns out that here's another interesting statistic. There's a woman named Katie Ornstein who has been going around. She has a company now where she trains people how to write opinion pieces, because her statistics show that 90% of the people who are online contributing to any kind of blogging or commenting on Facebook or commenting on 90% are men. And so the question is, I thought that was a very interesting statistic. In my classes, I don't see that at all. The women are just as empowered. But I just think that worldwide, if we can empower students, we can have more opportunity for everybody. As those students grow up, they'll feel comfortable. And so I think we need to make sure it's part of the education platform as well, and not just out there for the early adopter types. While the early adopters are great, and we wouldn't be anywhere without all of you. But we also need to make sure that everybody else feels empowered as well.
So I'm hearing that information literacy and digital literacy should be taught alongside literacy in that context. So people should be able to get that as part of their primary schooling.
So my idea is that all students should take information or digital literacy class. I've been trying already now to get one semester out of 4 or 8 semesters in high school. One semester that is dedicated to digital literacy, where kids learn to write for the web. They learn all these different styles. I mean, it's really important for them to learn how to write, because they're all writing 5-paragraph essay format. I don't know how many of you learned that. It's pretty bad, yeah. Introduction, 3 body paragraphs, and the conclusion. And so they don't know how to write anything else. So who do you think wants to read those 5-paragraph essays? Well, nobody, except the poor teacher has to read them. And so you need to learn to write in a way that is actually engaging, so people want to read it. So that's part of what I'm trying to do, and I have a lot of people supporting me. It's just getting the schools to change. I don't think I've ever had a project that's been as difficult as trying to get teachers to implement new curriculum. And I'm not quite sure where the right pressure point is. I'm looking for it. So I'd be happy to have suggestions from any of you, since you guys are really, I can tell, very good at thinking in advance and thinking about the future. So but yes, for sure, we need to have that for all students. By the way, there is a digital literacy gap. Kids in upper income areas have much more access to this than kids in lower income. I mean, the lower income kids are watching, videos on their phones, and they're Facebooking, and there's text messaging. But they are not writing things that could make a difference. They are not really participating as much as I would like them to.
I just lost my light here, so don't mind me while I get a little bit dark. I think in talking to people in the space, I imagine the parents are the primary lever there in terms of asking for something, demanding something that their children need to navigate the 21st century. That would be the first thing that comes to my mind. So we have education, digital literacy. Let's go through everyone else, and let's give me your greatest obstacle to your work that you're encountering right now, what it is, and maybe what one potential solution to overcoming it is that you found. So starting with Ryan.
Oh, you're putting me on the spot here.
I am. Throw it there.
I think we will find, and I don't think we're at stage yet, but it's a lot of the things that Esther sort of touched on in terms of uptake, because right now the partners that we're working with, we're very hands-on in terms of working with them through the pilots and being really accessible, because we're trying to learn from their experience as we develop the software and develop the tools. But when it comes time to release the product, how do you ensure that all radio stations know about it? I mean, we don't have the resources to be evangelists for the product, for our tools and our community worldwide, and so in a large part we're sort of going to be relying on our users, and especially the success of our users, because I think that nothing, and that would probably be the mitigating factor, is if you want to spread these tools to places where they're going to be useful, the best way to do it is by having really successful examples either of people facing similar challenges and how they've overcome them, for those organizations and those journalists to look at before they decide to adopt it. Because I don't know if it compares to trying to change curriculums, especially in the California public schools, but it definitely, when you're talking about changing the way that radio stations do business or asking people to think about new processes and new workflows, a lot of people, and these are the people that we're working with now, are excited and jump at the chance, but then a lot of other, and especially a lot more influential organizations, might be less eager to adopt a new form of experimentation.
Now, resistance to change is no small issue, and I see it just about every industry, media, government, certainly nonprofits, very challenging. So, Paul, on to you, sir. What's the biggest obstacle for your work? What are some of the problems and the ways to overcome it?
So our biggest problem really is actually literally getting digital messages out onto to radio waves and being able to receive them and manipulate them the way that we want to. So at the moment we're using Wi-Fi in cell phones to do this, but ad hoc, which is what we need to use in Wi-Fi, is actually pretty poorly standardised. It's a bit of a poor cousin in the 802.11 standards. And we actually have one of our team in Atlanta at the
Uh-oh. We had a drop off. Perhaps it was his Wi-Fi. We'll see if he comes back. Well, this is the joys of technology, right? Well, if he comes back, we can ask him about whether the greatest barrier is connectivity. So, Melissa, that means we move right on to you and the greatest obstacle to your work. And if Paul comes back, we'll finish up that one.
Okay, sounds good. I think for us, one of the big obstacles is choosing tools and platforms that are actually going to increase your efficiency or help you accomplish your goals, whether they are to capture information and share it or to give people a platform in which to voice their concerns. And there's just so much out there, and I think you have to be cognizant of what type of technology people are comfortable with, what they have available to them, what their security issues are like. A lot of these citizen journalists are reporting in countries where there are repressive regimes and mobile network operators, and they have access to data that people don't think about in their day-to-day activities. So I think just staying on top of the tools and making sure you choose the right tools for your work, whatever that may be, is key. And so that's what we're trying to do with this mobile journalist on an SD card, is actually put the tools into the hands of people who are out there doing this reporting and talk to them one-on-one and find out what works, what doesn't, what are the concerns and considerations, and then making that, wider public. So just trying to suss through the sea of potential tools to use, I think, is a challenge.
Yeah,
but it's a good challenge to have at the same point.
Yes, better to have too many good tools than not enough.
Exactly.
Well, I think we're all dealing with information glut right now, so finding relevance and context in that's very difficult. And part of that's created, of course, by civic media. We're all creating a heck of a lot more noise. Some of it's great to listen to, others, not as much. But of course, James, whatever you say is going to be extremely compelling in this context. Greatest barriers to your work. And I'm guessing it's not an esoteric fork of Ubuntu Linux somewhere.
No, the greatest barriers to our work is sort of crossing the gap between the people who really, really care about privacy and are motivated, and the large pool of people who care about privacy but don't have the tech skills, or care about privacy but aren't actually going to take the step of learning how to use a new tool. Getting the word out that this exists in communities will be really useful, and then also convincing the people to give it a try, and then supporting them in that try so that it's successful and it becomes a tool they can actually use on a daily basis. That's a pretty big lift. That's not just making software. That's actually doing the work of connecting directly to people trying their best to use technology that is very nascent. I mean, we see what's going on downtown at Occupy Wall Street, and everyone is sort of aware that the most surveilled people, in America as of last week are these kids who are trying to, make a ruckus in the downtown of every city in America. And there was a sense among my team that we should load up a box of software, bring it downtown, and say, hey, use this. You can have some private communication. But when we actually tried to figure out how we would do that and what it would look like, we realized that we're not ready yet. We realized that the gap we have to cross between having great tools and having great tools that are really usable by people who, are all fired up about connecting to others, but not all that fired up about shutting people out of the conversation, right? That they're in a very open communicating mode, trying to convince people that privacy is necessary, security is a feature, and that here's a way to do it, and learn to use something new that you don't already know how to use, and that's a hard lift. That's a hard thing to do. And whenever we see the specifics of what people are doing, where we think the FreedomBox could be really useful, trying to figure out what it would have to look like to actually be useful to people in the situations without changing the way they communicate, without changing their actual work, is I think our greatest challenge. And we've been, working with some user experience people and some designers who are helping us soften the edges of the box and streamline its presentation so that it tends to do a few things really well. And you can add capability to it if you want, but in the first instance, it is a private communication tool that will enable people in these situations to immediately start using it without actually having to teach them whole new ways of communicating with everyone else that they're trying to communicate with.
Thank you, James. And I don't want to shortchange Paul. We lost you a little bit early there. You were just talking about different Wi-Fi standards. Did you have anything more to say about that, and then some of the ways you're working to address that particular obstacle?
Sure. So I'm not actually sure quite where I dropped out, but the bottom line for us is getting data out onto the radio. So we're using ad hoc Wi-Fi, which is poorly standardized. The compatibility between devices is quite poor. So we have someone at the IEEE at the moment trying to work on that. And getting, for instance, Android to actually have an ad hoc Wi-Fi API. There actually isn't one at the moment. We have to route the phones to do this, which is pretty crazy given that Android is otherwise quite an open system. So that's one thing that would help enormously. And in actual fact, Nokia's Symbian S60 platform actually has better ad hoc support, and iPhone actually has better ad hoc support, although that's a little broken as well. But in the long term, what we would love to see, in fact, is actually to be able to use the main cellular radio in the cell phones. So in the US and here in Australia, there's what's called the ISM 915 band. So it's this fantastic piece of UHF spectrum, smack bang between the cell phone bands. And it has much better propagation characteristics. You can use it at a higher output level. And that would allow meshing between phones of maybe half a mile in urban areas, and certainly some number of miles for a single hop in open country in ideal conditions. And if we can get that happening, then we will actually have a tremendous enabler, because in fact, more than 80% of phone calls that people make or text they send are to people less than 4 kilometres away. And so if we can enable that local or muni-range mesh communication, then I think we'll actually start to see change. And as James has been talking about the challenge of getting people to accept technology, Serval's focus on telecoms actually gives us a huge leverage on that. We let people use their own phone number, and we say, look, these services that you normally have to pay a third party for, who can potentially intercept and do a whole pile of data mining on that, you can actually now do for free. And you can do without any of that kind of interception. So we think that that's absolutely tremendous, and the challenge is just actually getting access to reprogram the radio and the cell phones for the cellular radio. So if anyone knows a senior VP in one of the chipset companies, would love to talk about signing an NDA and getting access to the what we need to reprogram those radios so that we can really enable this communication for people in a great many situations.
Thank you, Paul. So in the spirit of civic media and in finding ourselves in this moment where it's many-to-many communication, I'm going to take a little bit of a risk here as a moderator and ask you if you all have any questions for each other, right? The idea of Walter Cronkite being the ultimate authority is gone. I think, what would you all ask one another about the projects that you've heard about so far?
I'll go first.
Thank you. Almost my experiment almost fell over there.
No, Paul, I was really interested in what you started to touch on at the very end, because I'm not sure if you were here when we were talking about sort of uptake among ordinary people, but I mean, in your situation, it's not just the sort of success of the program, but it's also if you can get a few people every few hundred meters to be using Serval, it could cover the entire world. But at the same time, if one person's really excited about it and none of his neighbors are, then it doesn't work. So do you have any strategies beyond, in terms of how to convince people, like can you go a little bit more into depth on what your sort of marketing strategy is, if that's what you guys call it, outreach, I guess?
So I guess there's a couple of things. One, we haven't done any formal kind of marketing at this point while we're developing, but we've been designing the protocol so that the barriers to adoption are as absolutely low as we can. So letting people use their own phone number without needing, a carrier or anyone else to verify that identity. We have some interesting protocols for doing that in a completely distributed manner. But one of the other things that we actually do on a very pragmatic front is, imagine that we're in a disaster zone or some situation, and your phone's as dead as a dodo, and you see me, I'm here, talking on my phone, and obviously talking to someone. You go, hang on a minute, how on earth are you talking? Can I borrow your phone so I can try and call my family? And then I say, well, look, I'm running this Serval thing, and it lets me make these calls. And if I press this button, and then you on your smartphone try and find an internet connection, it'll actually find a web server running on my phone that will actually let you download and install the Serval software immediately at that point. And so we can do that, if you like, you can do the sales on the spot kind of thing. And I think that will be quite a tremendous thing. And even beyond the Serval software, we're talking about journalism tools on an SD card. We can actually distribute those live through the mesh. We can update them live through the mesh. We can do software updates without infrastructure. We've designed this in from the outset.
What kind of bandwidth restrictions are there? I mean, if a lot of people, if it's a disaster, you can imagine demand for Serval going up pretty quickly. How big is the file that would be transferred?
Look, the beautiful thing is, the traditional thinking about bandwidth limitation is if you're doing long-distance communication. So we know on a mesh that the bandwidth goes down about half for every hop. So, but when you're getting the software from me, you're literally getting it from me. We're like 2 meters apart. We should be able to get, it's 72 megabit or 100 megabit Wi-Fi between our phones. So the bandwidth limitation actually is much less than what you would ordinarily think.
Okay. Anybody, any other takers in playing along with this idea of asking questions of one another? You can say no. Okay. Well, I think with that, I'm actually going to call this one to a close. I have to say this was really an honor and humbling to be talking with you about what you're doing. You all are clearly really committed to the space, to creating tools that other people can use, and that's not a small thing. So many of people in the journalism space are doing remarkable things with tools, but tool making, I think, is discounted as an art, and it's incredibly important. So thank you for that, and certainly thank you for inviting me to be part of the conversation. If anyone has anything further they want to share about their projects, this would be a great time. Otherwise, I look forward to hanging out with you another time.